Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the European Context Talk on voters' choices and international influence in Romania's presidential elections with Oana Popescu-Zamfir. My name is Mirjana Tomic. I curate and moderate European Context seminars and talks on politics and media in Europe. European Context is a project supported by Vienna-based Erste Foundation, and the partners are Presse Club Concordia, founded in Vienna in 1859, and Forum Journalismus und Medien, founded by the city of Vienna, an organization specialized in training of professional journalists. As you all know, but I think it's important to underline, especially for today's topic, the focus of these talks is always to understand different local contexts, and speakers originate and live in the countries they speak about. That way, they fully understand the local perceptions that are often more important than facts. In case of the presidential elections in Romania, facts and perceptions are intertwined. On 6 December 2024, presidential election in Romania was annulled by the Constitutional Court, alleging Russian intervention on behalf of the independent and pro-Russian candidate Călin Georgescu, who took an unexpected lead in the first round. The court decision was taken 48 hours before the second round. The role of TikTok was underlined. The platform this platform in Romania is used by about 9 million people. Moscow and Washington found this election undemocratic. And this decision, this decision undemocratic. The US Vice President, J.D. Vance, and Tesla boss, Elon Musk, said that cancellation meant Romania does not share American values. We have invited Oana Popescu-Zamfir to disentangle the Romanian context, elections, foreign influences, issues at stake, voters' concerns. Oana is a former state secretary for EU affairs, director and founder of Global Focus Center, an independent foreign policy think tank in Bucharest. She's an associate expert for the European Council on Foreign Relations and the Carnegie Europe, and Europe Futures Fellow at the Institute of Human Sciences in Vienna. She served as a foreign policy advisor to the president of the Romanian Senate, programs director of the Aspen Institute Romania, and senior editor of the Romanian edition of Foreign Policy. Before I give the word to Oana, a very short reminder. On 4th May, Romania holds new presidential elections. Georgescu is not a candidate, and polls give advantage to George Simion, another far-right candidate who advocates the unification of Romania and Moldova, family and Christian values. And Oana will tell us about his current policy towards Ukraine and Russia. Let us not forget, Romania is a strategic partner of NATO, and the military base near Constanța in southeast Romania on the Black Sea coast will become the largest NATO military base in Europe and will surpass the US military base in Ramstein, Germany. And last but not least, Romania has a semi-presidential system, and the head of state sits at the center of the national security. The president appoints ambassadors, coordinates intelligence agencies, steers foreign affairs and defense policy, and chairs Supreme Council of National Defense. Thus, it does matter who is the head of state in Romania. Normally, Romanian presidential elections are not in headlines, but this time of the international media is different. Oana, let me start with the obvious question that is on everyone's mind. Who has more political influence in Romania, Russia or the United States? Were the 2024 elections remotely managed from Moscow, or Moscow exploited the already existing internal problems and increased them further? Thank you so much for joining us. The screen is yours, Oana.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Mirjana, and thank you for everyone participating, and apologies again for the slight delay. I think you've started with the key questions. On the one hand, I will say to your first question, clearly it is the United States that has much more influence in Romania than Russia. It just so happens that at this point, with the Trump administration, the two have pretty much aligned interests, not necessarily the very same, but they do overlap to a significant extent. And that is very unfortunate because, to go to your second question, I think the lesson for other countries, particularly in Europe, is how quickly a country can flip from being one of the most pro-European, pro-American, Euro-Atlanticist, call it whatever you want. Romania has featured ever since before its EU and NATO accession at the very top when it comes to how committed to EU and NATO membership countries were in Europe. And so how quickly it can flip from being so single-mindedly pro-Euro-Atlanticist to what we see today, which I think is well categorized, unfortunately, also in international indexes, which have ranked Romania as a hybrid regime, so downgrading it from a semi-functional democracy. And we also see a development that is very worrying from the illusion that we used to have that we are organically anti-Russian. We are immune to Russian propaganda and manipulation simply because of a very troublesome history between Romania and Russia throughout its history, with Romanian territories being moved back and forth by Stalin, with a history of communism where even Ceausescu was playing kind of a lone rider game in the region, balancing the West and Moscow, so leading a rather independent foreign policy from the USSR. So I think like I said, we lived for a long time with the illusion that that would make us immune to pretty much every kind of Russian pressure that we've seen exerted on neighboring countries all across the region. And with the elections, but also I think well before that, and that's something that we as a think tank had been warning authorities, that true, when such pressure carries an open Russian label, people tend to be way more cautious and reserved. But when it doesn't, and what it does is just to use domestic actors and use anti-Western narratives, narratives that are meant to aggravate the lack of trust, which is already very high, between citizens and the government and the state as a whole. Narratives that are supposed to push nationalism, anti-Ukrainian feelings, for instance. Let's not forget that Romania and Ukraine, before the invasion started, were not necessarily comfortable neighbors to each other. We have a history of disputes, territorial and otherwise, with Ukraine. So all of these tensions have been exploited by Russia. And I would say the story of the elections and of the rise of the pro-Russian candidate is very much demand-driven. So I think the main drivers were primarily internal. But when I say internal, what I mean is, to give you a little bit of context, that Russian influence doesn't always work the way we see it in countries like the Republic of Moldova or Serbia or Georgia, where it's much more visible, where the connections are there and part of society is already pro-Russian or anchored within that system of values. In countries like Romania, it's much more under the radar. And the way I see it is that ever since the regime change in 1989, of course, the networks of Russian influence have persisted. A lot of those who were in a position to assume the levers of power after the regime change had strong connections to Moscow. In a big country with a complex economy, it would have been preposterous to assume that people taking to the streets to effect the revolution would also be able to run the country. To be able to run the country, you needed to be already anchored within the regime and know the ins and outs. So, of course, there was some degree of continuity in Romania between the communist regime and what followed, the democratic transition. However, these networks of Russian influence were marginal for decades, I think. On the one hand, because Russia was not in a good place and was not well placed to exert influence. On the other hand, because Romania's the cross-party and unanimous decision also on a social level was to join the EU and NATO, and this was such a strong strategic choice that within political parties and within public institutions, the dissenters, those who would have favored proximity to Russia, were marginalized. But the moment that the EU and NATO stopped kind of putting Romania in the limelight and following day in, day out, the anti-corruption fight, the solidity of rule of law, our compliance with the necessary reforms, and so on and so forth, because Europe is itself facing complex problems, from the war in Ukraine to the rise of the far right and nationalism, because the US has already been through one Trump term and was preparing for the next, because we are full-fledged members of the EU and NATO, so there's not so much oversight as there used to be before. I think slowly these networks have seen an opportunity to come out and become much more visible, and Putin decided to use these levers, not just in Romania, but everywhere, to influence societies from within in anti-democratic directions.
Oana, let me ask you a few follow-up questions. You have mentioned a lot of topics. By the way, for the audience, we shall talk for about 30 minutes, and then there will be a Q&A period, half an hour. And I prefer if you just click and you can ask your question live. So you mentioned Romania being the most pro-European country and shifting really fast. Question number one, what triggered this change? You have mentioned that the EU has stopped its monitoring of Romania. Why? Because Romania, I heard one Romanian journalists say recently at a panel that if you are pro-Ukraine, then the EU doesn't really follow what you do internally. Question number three, Romania has a huge diaspora. It's about 5 million people, and their vote counts as well. So I would like to understand how come that this diaspora several years ago was flying back to Romania to protest against corruption, and now, at least in Austria, and the Romanian diaspora in Austria is quite big, they are all going to vote for the far right. So just give us the context, and please don't forget to mention the influence of American and Russian churches.
Sure. I mean, let me start with the diaspora, because I think it's very telling for the general dynamics in Romania. This is the same diaspora which is fundamentally anti-establishment. The diaspora vote has consistently been anti-establishment. And that makes sense, because they left the country because they were dissatisfied with the options that they had here. They were dissatisfied with the quality of governance, with the speed of change. And that is something that persists even in Romania. And it brings me to your first question as to why Romania flipped so fast. Well, because this emphasis and the unanimous desire to be part of the West, which is absolutely genuine at the level of society, has generated a lack of any sort of debate on how we wanted to do that, what people really understood by that. Did they just want the benefits, or did they really sign up to the values of the European Union? did they have a realistic perspective on what to expect? Because successive governments have sold EU accession as some sort of a delivery by Brussels from every evil that we could possibly imagine. So, prosperity would flourish and freedom, money would be pouring in, everybody would be so much better off. And in fact, I think somewhere around half the country, or perhaps more, depending on what kind of figures you look at, is still dealing with poverty, is still dealing with inequality, the perception of social injustice, the fact that they see that in macroeconomic terms, Romania has had a stellar development, and we've been one of the countries that's been growing the most in Central Eastern Europe, and from an economic point of view, and even human development. However, that's been very unequal. If you live in an urban environment, you will be so much better off than 20, 30 years ago. But if you live in a small urban environment or in a rural environment, your access to decent healthcare might be even worse than during communism. Your access to quality education, the same. Infrastructure, transport. Add to that subjective perceptions as to job security, which of course, during communism, there was no unemployment. This is completely unnatural. So obviously we live now in a normal world of market forces, but that has brought in, the transition itself has brought in a lot of stress and a lot of quick change. And nobody on a government level has been willing to deal with this. So I think a big part of this country essentially feels abandoned by their representatives, and they have lost trust in democracy as a whole, because their perception is, well, democracy hasn't worked for me. Same for EU integration. There's much more skepticism when it comes to the actual benefits of EU integration than there used to be, because again, people equate EU accession with personal progress, and they haven't really seen that happening. And the diaspora is very similar in that, in the sense that part of the Romanians working and living abroad have become well integrated, have blended in, and so on and so forth. Many, many others, while very happy to live in a country where they have other opportunities and they're willing to take advantage of that, don't feel at home. There's a lot of stress involved in having to live and work someplace else, having to deal with a system of values or with people that don't feel like your people and the values that you have grown up with. So against this background, of course, that forces like the Orthodox Church or evangelist churches in the US, whose interests very much align with those of the Orthodox Church in Romania and the Orthodox Church in Russia, in pushing the narrative that we have lost our compass when it comes to traditional values, that we have lost our patriotism and feeling of belonging and the fundamentals of everyone's individual identity, which are the family and their country and so on and so forth. The narratives that these institutions have been pushing, and the reasons are very pragmatic. The Orthodox Church has been losing followers because of modernization and the young people in this country being less religious and caring more about TikTok than about the Bible. So they're trying to win those people back. The evangelists in the US especially have built ever since the early 90s a network of support both for the Romanian diaspora in the US and for those left behind in Romania. And in the early 90s, especially people from poor communities were really able to get anything from furniture to a fridge, a stove, clothes, and anything they needed shipped from the US if they were joining one of these cults. And so there has been a lot of proselytizing and a lot of very tight links built with the diaspora and through the diaspora with the people back home, which have allowed for the quick dissemination of these anti-democratic narratives the moment they started being actively pushed by domestic or external actors. So I would say this is the toxic mix, if you wish, is the lack of political representation for a large part of the population, disillusionment with the quality of governance, disillusionment with the electoral offer. Even now, after we have faced such an unusual event as the annulment of the elections, the offer of presidential candidates is really not more stellar than last year. So people continue to be very disengaged, dissatisfied. Normally, this is manifested through not voting and not caring about politics anymore. But when a figure appears who embodies all your anger, all your frustration, even when the things they say, as was the case with Călin Georgescu, are absurd, anti-scientific, conspiracist, make no sense, completely irrational or whatever, and they don't propose any genuine solutions, the simple fact that you feel heard, that you feel that what they say is what you have been thinking for so many years, makes you at least cast that angry vote, the protest vote, where I think maybe it was Ivan Krastev in one of his debates who said we tend to underestimate the willingness of people to burn the house down while they're in it, just to signal their anger with the political class. And
Could you explain briefly the difference between the worldview, excuse me, of Georgescu and the other far-right candidates that are now competing for the presidency, and to what extent they are happy to have Donald Trump in the United States, so they do not have to justify their far-right views, or they feel reflected? And I just want to quote somebody that was our speaker 2 years ago. That was the former Prime Minister of Slovakia, Iveta Radičová. We had an event about the far right, and I asked her, Iveta, this was before the last elections in Slovakia. I asked her, you were Prime Minister, what did you do wrong? And she said, we did not understand how important was the identity and security for people, and we didn't really deliver what we promised.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, look, I mean, I can clearly answer your question, but let me introduce a caveat and say, these people don't really have a worldview, at least in Romania. They're mostly opportunistic politicians who will have whatever worldview works for the electorate. They're populists. Clearly, they have identified a window of opportunity now to push for nationalist perspectives and ultra-orthodox and socially conservative. But all of these policies, ideological beliefs, I don't know what to call them, are actually just revanchist. It's a tidal wave of anti-Western feeling that's been cultivated throughout the years, and it might seem paradoxical, because you would say, but if people are so pro-EU and pro-NATO in Romania, then how can they be anti-Western at the same time? Well, they can, because they want the security that NATO brings. They want the money that the EU brings. Nobody really wants to leave the EU. This features in polls constantly. And I think there were polls in Romania asking if your presidential candidate held these beliefs, and they listed pretty much what Simion and Georgescu's worldview was. Would you vote for them? And many answered yes. And then the next question was, if they wanted to take the country out of the EU and NATO, would you still vote for them? And the answer was overwhelmingly no. So people do want the benefits. But at the same time, again, successive governments, so this is internal doing, cultivated the idea that all of the painful reforms that we needed to implement were orders from Washington and Brussels. So created the perception that Romania was not sovereign anymore, that it just really took orders and had to obey and didn't have a choice, because they were not willing to take responsibility for things that really needed to be done. And they didn't want to lose voters, and they didn't want to lose popularity, so they blamed it all on Washington and Brussels. Same for the anti-corruption fight. Everyone who in some shape or form was negatively affected by the anti-corruption fight obviously blamed that on Brussels and said, well, you know, the political elites, essentially my political competitors, are sold to Brussels. So the fact that they take on me is not because I did something wrong, but because they're just obeying orders from their masters. So hence Călin Georgescu's ideology, which is very similar to the QAnon ideology in the US, which basically says the world is run by these globalist forces from the shadows. It's not transparent. You as the voter have no accountability. You don't have a say. Democracy is a sham because your vote doesn't count. And well, you know, this was further consolidated accidentally, so to speak, by the cancellation of elections. And all of these things have also been pushed by Russia and by Trump's America. All of this anti-EU discourse, all of the attempt to weaponize fear and anger and distrust, which weakens our societies, which weakens the European Union solidarity, using Ukraine to essentially tell people that the EU wants war and that the EU supporting Ukraine means further instability. All of these things have been pushed from both sides. And to be clear, in Romania, there were, especially because we talk about identity and security, these networks, which are usually to essentially sketch what they would look like, the domestic agents and Russian disruptors, it would be Romanian politicians having business connections with Romanian entities. Those Romanian entities have business connections with an entity in the Republic of Moldova or in Ukraine or in Serbia or in Hungary or in whatever other regional country. And then those entities would have connections with some Russian oligarchs or Russian groups of interests. And often the chain also goes through the US. So, you know, Romanian politicians and businesses having links with Trump circles, ultra-conservative Republican circles in the US, and those would have connections with Russia, because what better way to kind of mask the Russian influence than to go through the US, which is the strategic partner of Romania. So this is how it's a symbiotic relationship which has cultivated security fears, so fear of war, fear of instability, the perception that you cannot escape Russia because it's so big and so close to you. So it's better to just give in and reach some sort of accommodation with them rather than confront them. And issues of identity, cultivating the perception that the EU will just transform your society into something that it's not. So this is pretty much the ideology of both George Simion and Călin Georgescu, with nuances.
Thank you so much. Just two brief questions, and we already have questions in the chat. What is the role of the media in this whole, where I understand that most Romanian media is party affiliated, so that there isn't a really sort of independent media. That's one thing. And the second is, depending on who is elected president, what would be the implications for Brussels and for the European Union?
Well, the media is party affiliated in the sense that it's owned by, let's call them local oligarchs, small oligarchs, who are using the media to protect their other business interests by paying lip service to different political parties and the leadership of the time. So what we have in Romania is a very frequent phenomenon in the region, which is a multiplicity of media outlets, but not a plurality of voices, because the perspectives that you hear are not necessarily different. And because the media is kind of lumped together in media holdings, the capacity for any single person to influence a large part of the population by disseminating the same kind of perception through different channels is very high. And then there's independent media, which I think we have seen plenty of before and after the elections, because a lot of the genuine investigations that have been carried out, very substantive, I think articles published on what happened before and after and during and so on, were by small independent media outlets. But these are underfunded. They're just passionate people really doing their job and crowdsourcing their funding, which, it's a good thing that for at least some of them, it's really working, but there's no way that it can counter the overwhelming influence of the big media outlets, not to mention that the social media platforms help them disseminate their stories for the small ones, but also amplify all the disinformation, as you very well know, tremendously, and that's played a key role during the elections. And as for the election of the president, I think it really has the potential to alter significantly Romania's pro-European course. Unfortunately, first of all, the external context isn't helping. The Trump administration has exerted a lot of pressure on Romania for ideological reasons. I mean, Trump needs to sell to the world the idea that the MAGA way of doing things works, that it's the ultimate recipe for success. Romania, a country that used to be so obedient to Washington, daring to actually stand up to Washington and decide, frankly speaking, for the first time in 35 years, Romania decided to stick to its pro-democratic path despite external pressure, not because of external pressure. So this was, for the first time ever, a decision made completely internally. We had this strong confrontation between those genuinely committed to the pro-Western choice and those who were looking for a way to change Romania back to a sort of Viktor Orban, Donald Trump kind of regime. And at least temporarily, including through the annulment of elections, the good guys won. And this to Washington is unacceptable, because this is what they have a problem with when it comes to the EU as a whole. How can a country that would normally have no will of its own, but have to obey the will of its big partners, how does it dare oppose orders from Washington? And so with a lot of pressure from the Trump administration, which is already causing parts of the Romanian political system to seek ways to accommodate, they're also, let's tell the truth, they're very happy to do it. I mean, they see the opportunity to have the perfect justification. I mean, look, Washington is pressuring us. How could we possibly resist that? And if this comes with the perks of basically being able to have a regime in Romania which is much less accountable, much less transparent, much more transactional, hey, even better for us. And so I'm afraid that this can very well be the course of the country if somebody wins the elections who is not fully committed to the pro-European agenda. And I will close by saying that because I forgot to address something you asked about Ukraine. And already for the past 3 years since the invasion of Ukraine, the calculation of the Romanian leading coalition has been, as long as we are good partners when it comes to Ukraine, we support the EU efforts, we support the US efforts, we support Ukraine in every way, then they will not poke their nose in our huge budget deficit, in the anti-corruption fight that's no longer taking place, and so on and so forth. So there's every willingness now at the level of political elites in Romania to continue trading this, the idea of Romania being a good security partner for regional security in exchange for Brussels and Washington turning a blind eye to democratic backsliding domestically. So the fight between the good guys and the bad guys is continuing, I'm afraid.
Thank you so much. I ask whoever wants to ask a question, just raise your hand. And in the meantime, I would like to read one question that we have already by Alfred Karl. Isn't presidential system part of the problem as well? Those systems are proven to be more prone to authoritarianism in post-communist context.
Yes, to a significant extent. However, the power of the president is mostly symbolic. That's and that is part of the problems that come with the semi-presidential system. Meaning, although the president has very little influence on domestic affairs, and even when it comes to foreign policy and security, decisions need to be validated with the National Security Council. Some of them have to be validated by Parliament, and so on and so forth. However, the system tends to fall in line. The president has traditionally been seen as working very closely with the security establishment. The institutions of force, including the intelligence services, have learned to use their leverage with the president and the way that they work with the president to exert influence. So indeed, the risk that a president can kind of single-handedly turn things around, not because they necessarily have all the constitutional powers to do so, but because they can also exert pressure on Parliament, on the executive, and so on, saying their election represents the agenda of the public and the will of the people, and so on and so forth, and using their visibility as an engine to attract voters, and so on and so forth. This gives the president a lot of power. We've had a lot of discussions in Romania about potential transition to a more parliamentary system, which is tricky, and it has its benefits and its disadvantages, because at the same time, political parties in Romania have been anything but democratic internally. Their policies for promoting people to high office and so on have been very personalized, based on loyalty to the party leadership, not on merit. So political parties are a big part of the problem. They have come to be completely non-representative of the public agenda. And so even the governing coalition that we have is basically the result of the two main political parties decided that it's easier to divide the money between themselves rather than compete for it. So we have very little democratic competition. And under the circumstances, you can say, is it really healthy to give more power to the parliament? And at the same time, in fact, Romania does have, and that's what's saved us several times, more checks and balances, constitutionally speaking, when it comes to the ability of any single power in the state to accumulate an excess of power. So we do have quite a lot of obstacles to any single actor dominating the whole scene. So, I see your point, but we don't have a definitive answer yet.
Thank you. Catherine Calvite, please go ahead. You can turn on your camera and please introduce yourself.
I used to be a long time a correspondent for Süddeutsche Zeitung. Now I'm freelancing and writing for Der Falter, an Austrian newspaper. I have two questions which are intertwined. I keep hearing the narrative that the big parties, liberals and conservatives, push Georgescu in order to have maybe an easy candidate to beat so that they're part of the problem. Which leads me to my second question. Does it make any difference whether Georgescu is the candidate and now Simion is the candidate? They have kind of the same ideology, if there is an ideology. Do the people themselves make any difference?
I think the only difference it makes is that Georgescu, I think, was in a much more privileged place, so to speak, to be able to harness all this public anger. Not everybody who voted for Georgescu will vote for George Simion. George Simion is much more strongly associated with a nationalist ideology. He built his political career on the idea of reunification with the Republic of Moldova. He's persona non grata in Moldova and Ukraine. So he's a genuine nationalist. At the same time, he's a moderate nationalist, let's say. He wants to be Giorgia Meloni, not Viktor Orban, for instance. He has repeatedly stated that he is not anti-EU, anti-NATO, that he is anti-Russia. So at the same time, he has a stronger nationalist identity than Georgescu in the very classical sense. And he's not seen as being anti-establishment enough. Strangely enough, I mean, he has come to be perceived as being part of the system, and he is. I mean, he's a guy who wants to be part of the system and to use the anti-establishment positioning as a sort of entry gate to that establishment. So for that reason, there is also the danger that if he wins, it will be easier for the mainstream parties who have imported a lot of the ideology and a lot of the discourse of the fringe parties in order to recover some of the voters. It will be much easier for them to work with Simion and to even accommodate his party as part of a future governing coalition. Because at the same time that we have George Simion, we have his internal competitor within the party. They've recently broken up, so to speak, Claudiu Târziu, who's a hardcore kind of neo-Nazi ideologue, much more radical. And it's easy to say all the loonies have stayed with Târziu. Simion has stayed with the tolerable part of the Alliance for the Unity of Romanians, the Nationalist Party, so they can be legitimate government partners. Călin Georgescu was simply a wild figure. He was not even, it was hard to pin him down as only a nationalist. He had extreme nationalist views, going all the way to nationalizing all foreign capital and so on and so forth, but he was also a conspiracy theorist. He was an obscurantist, and that's why I equate him more with the QAnon movement, and I think a lot of his partners, genuinely, people who have supported him and so on, are part of the MAGA movement in the US. So he was better placed from an electoral point of view. George Simion is much better anchored within the system. So it is hard to assess if he's going to win, but probably what positions him so well is the weak offer on the other side, on the side of mainstream parties, and the fact that he has already built a solid reputation on a local level by campaigning at the grassroots, on social media, really reaching the people who have been neglected by every other significant party.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, or I'll ask? I don't see any questions. Well, I have a question. You have mentioned there are several concepts you repeated several times. One is fear, and anti-establishment. Well, anti-establishment, what does it mean? We destroy everything, and then what?
And then we see. Really, I think that's the mood in Romania. That's the mood in other countries, where decisions seem irrational and strange, and you don't understand what people actually want, and you think, fine, I mean, you're going to vote for that guy, and then what? How is that going to change your life for the better? I'm afraid people's answer is, I don't know and I don't care. I just don't want to have the same figures that I've seen for decades. I want someone who is so radically different, even if that means they're crazy. But I want someone who is radically different just for the sake of change. And in Romania, a lot of people say, it's a sort of suicide, if you want. People say, well, you know what? And they used to invoke that as a reason to vote for Georgescu. He is absolutely a crazy guy, and he, we agree that he could be outright dangerous, and so on and so forth. But if he gets elected, maybe that's a powerful enough signal to the powers that be, in such a way that they finally change something about the way they do politics, that they finally get a wake-up call and present a different offer next time. So really, that's when people feel afraid, because of afraid of the financial crisis that might be looming, afraid of war, afraid that their children's life is going to be much worse than theirs, that they might have a hard time in old age or whatever. They're willing to go to extreme lengths to feel that they're taking back control. That's the Trump mantra, right? And that is what's been happening everywhere.
Thank you. Martin, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much for everything. It's quite interesting. I'm in Katowice on Economic Congress, so maybe there is some noise in the background. My question is about the economy, because you mentioned fear, you mentioned identity, you mentioned a little bit about the economic kind of fear, but where is the economy in all the picture? Economic expectations. I don't know if we can speak about the programs. So what is the place of the economic topics in all of that? Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
I would say, unfortunately, the dominating issue is the huge budget deficit, which has only which has only grown so much because of mindless spending during 2024, which was an year of elections throughout. We had all of the possible elections, local, European, national, presidential. So the governing coalition has been spending like crazy. And that started in 2023, actually, looking ahead to the elections. So I think the fear that we might have economic vulnerabilities against the context of potential economic crisis in Europe and worsening regional situation and this budget deficit, I think that dominates the discourse when it comes to politics, and the fact that this means raising taxes, it means imposing additional taxes, it might mean making things more difficult for small and medium companies, more obstacles to foreign investment. So I think it's more about anxiety, about prices and the cost of doing business and so on and so forth than anything else. So there's very little talk about anything structural. And that's always been a problem in Romania, and that's what's prevented people from feeling the full benefits of macroeconomic growth. At the same time, strangely enough, it is the economy that is our main sort of element of resilience in front of anti-democratic backsliding. And the reason for that is that Romania's economy is so dependent on foreign capital. It's still a good magnet for investments. We are neighboring Ukraine, so whether companies are looking to participate actively in the Ukraine reconstruction or whatever is going to happen in Ukraine, or whether they're divesting from Ukraine to neighboring countries, Romania is a place of choice. So we actually stand to benefit to some extent from all this context, not to mention the Trump tariffs, which makes it interesting to try nearshoring in Central Eastern Europe. So we have good conditions, but they all depend on foreign investment. And that means that somebody like Călin Georgescu, who was professing nationalizing foreign capital and so on, would be utterly unable to do it. And generally, any political establishment would have to take into account European partners, because those European partners have leverage through their companies present in Romania, which could easily move someplace else. And that would mean, people being laid off, precisely the constituency that is likely to vote for these radical figures and so on. So you're not going to shoot yourself in the foot by basically making sure that the people who have voted for you are left without a job the next day. So, the economy in Romania is on the one hand, a very healthy development engine, and on the other hand, it meets with a lot of political opportunism, which traditionally means that the benefits find it hard to find their way to people's pockets.
Thank you so much. There is another question in the chat. I'll read it. Thank you for the enlightening conference. My name is Laura Balomiri. I wrote for the Standa, the Austria Press Agentur, and ZDF as a Romanian correspondent for more than a decade, and I subscribe to all your points. My question is, additionally to all the pertinent points you're making, whether the host countries don't also play a significant role in pushing the Romanian diaspora towards the far right. In Austria specifically, the position in the Schengen question, the reduction of family benefits, and generally the way that Romanians are often treated as second-class citizens when they are not ignored altogether, or at least this is the way they themselves perceive the way they are treated. Do you think this is a factor too?
Absolutely. And I mean, the pro-Russian narrative has traditionally been Romania is being treated as a second-class country by the EU and NATO. NATO wouldn't really jump to our defense if push come to shove. The EU just wants to use Romania as a market, and it doesn't really share in the benefits as it should. The major member states make all the decisions. Romania's vote and voice doesn't really count. So all of these narratives have been pushed by pro-Russian forces, and they have been actively supported by EU member states, genuinely trying to take advantage of their position within the EU. Whether it means Hungary, for instance, blocking EU consensus, and then a lot of people in Romania saying, why don't we do the same? Why can Viktor Orban walk away with this and we don't fight for our interests when it comes to Schengen, for instance? Or whether it's Austria, denying basically Romania the right to be a Schengen member without any cause other than domestic political infighting in Austria. That played a major role. I mean, that's when we really saw, not the anti-EU feeling, because that's not anti-EU feeling. That's just people feeling disappointed and saying, hey, it's obvious that the EU doesn't play by the rules. They profess a set of norms that they don't follow. So why should we? I mean, isn't that silly? Why can't we just watch out for our own interest if others will do the same at our expense? And the same happened with the Netherlands before that, and with other perceptions of injustice, and of course the anti-immigrationist policies and the hypocritical discourse within the EU, which doesn't really acknowledge the role that people from another country play in the labor market, in helping the economy grow, filling vacant positions on when it comes to jobs and so on. That doesn't help, because it clearly makes the Romanian diaspora feel that they're just being used. And that's what also drives them to say, if they're going to use us, we'll use them. So we'll just try to walk away with the benefits, the money, whatever we can take. And we're not going to sign up to the values, because they don't believe in those values themselves. And that is a powerful channel of influence for nationalists and pro-Russians moving forward. And I think this is a problem that we all have in the EU. And by the way, the major issue, and something I would really like to leave you with as food for thought, is that looking at Romania and our elections, it's always easy to say it would have been better to prevent it. And it's a failure of the system, which didn't show enough resilience in front of Russian or external interference. And I would say absolutely, this was a failure of the system. But in most countries within the EU, Russia has stopped being an external actor a long time ago. Russia is an internal actor in most of our countries through the business connections, the political connections, the corruption that they've been helping and cultivating, the far-right nationalist, ultra-conservative networks. So through all of these means of influence, Russia is an internal actor, and it's very hard for every country to increase its resilience without very seriously looking at this problem, which is, how do you deal with your own citizens, with your own people who have signed up to the Russian agenda already and are now pushing it, because those are your citizens. You cannot treat them as external agents, but you also cannot ignore the fact that they're basically advancing the interests of a hostile state. So that's going to be a dilemma for all of us moving forward.
Thank you for this thought. I was going to end, but there is one question from the Spanish news agency EFE. Hello, Oana. Thank you a lot for the conference. My last question: who are, in your views, the main candidates able to move on the second round on May 18th? Simion seems to be the front runner. Who can join him in the second round?
Very, very difficult to answer, because polls have been very unreliable, but at the same time, public opinion has been extremely volatile, and things can change from one day to the next. So at this point, I would say, clearly Călin Antonescu, the coalition candidate, at least has the machinery of the two big parties behind him. However, it is, it's debatable to what extent these parties, the central leadership, controls the rank and file anymore, because a lot of the local organizations secretly or openly voted for Georgescu, will vote for Simion, have been supporting the campaign of the far-right forces, and so on and so forth. So it's really an open question whether the coalition candidate can really perform as strongly as one would expect, especially since he's not a very strong candidate himself. He does not represent what people wanted, which was a new figure. He's an old figure. He's the image of the establishment. At the same time, there's another sovereignist candidate, former Prime Minister Victor Ponta, who is more outrageous than Simion. He's a Serbian citizen as well. He's a close friend of Alexander Vucic. He used to work with Turkey's Erdogan. He has links to China. So he's basically supporting the interests of every autocratic country that we can think of, and his government fell because of corruption. So again, the paradox: he's the embodiment of everything that people have protested against in Romania throughout the past decade or so. But at the same time, he comes back with a bang because he has picked up from Georgescu a lot of his very extremist radical discourse, pro-Trump, anti-EU, very hardcore nationalist. And he seems to be quite strongly supported by a good part of the Romanian establishment, which is precisely that dark part of the establishment which supported Georgescu as well, and which still sees a window of opportunity to turn Romania around into a version of Hungary. So he stands good chances as well. And then Nicu Dan, the current mayor of Bucharest, perhaps the most pro-democratic, pro-European candidate at this point, he might have some ability to harness the vote of everybody who is afraid that Romania is going to go down a very dangerous path. And so he's in a good position for that. But he runs as an independent. At the same time, he's supported by the two parts of the Liberal Party, part of the Save Romania Union. Everything has been very dramatic around which one of the two candidates, Nicu Dan or Elena Lasconi, the president of the Save Romania Union, this party supports. So that I think that has weakened his position, and his identity is not really clear. People see him as a mayor, but I'm not sure they can identify him very clearly with a potential presidential position. So, you know, all of the candidates are weak. The campaigns have been bad, and a lot has been attempted to imitate Georgescu on social media and use TikTok and use flooding people with ads and so on. But again, social media only influences some people, and you cannot pull the same trick twice. So it really remains to be seen if that's going to be enough. And honestly, I would not venture to make a prediction because it might very well be wrong. I think it's very hard to tell at this point.
Thank you for your brilliant presentation, Oana. Media will have lots of work in the coming days. And I do hope that the Romanian society somehow managed to withstand the backsliding. And it is not very easy once you backslide to come back to democracy. And with this thought, I just want to announce our next event, which is hybrid, meaning in Concordia and online, which is on the 9th of May. We have 3 speakers from Poland speaking, using, again, the elections in Poland as an excuse, so to say, to speak about migration, to speak about transition, to speak about women, security, and militarization in Poland. And thank you so much, Oana. You really provided an excellent context. And well, let's hope it's not all destroyed by the anti-establishment feeling. We have to construct something. Thank you so much. Mulțumesc.
Thank you very much, and keep your fingers crossed for us during the month of May.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.